I'll go right on ahead and I'll admit it. There was a time there when I had doubts. I had serious doubts as to whether or not there was going to be a successful outcome to the task at which I was engaged at the time. You see, we purchased a new TV set because Cindy saw that. Ooh, that would be nice to have that TV. I'll blame that on her because it was her idea. It's her TV. We purchased a new TV set. And it's a nice one, a nice big one. And we brought it home and got it out and put its legs on and discovered that it was too big for the TV stand that we had at the time. And there's probably another sermon or two there, but we'll let those go for now. Anyway, having discovered that we needed a new TV stand, we then went shopping because, you got to have a stand to put the TV on if you want to watch this new TV. And we took the required size measurements with us on a little slip of paper. And once we found one that we thought that would work good, we bought it. Or I guess I should say we bought a big box, really big box, heavy cardboard box. That had a nice picture of a really nice looking TV stand on the cover. And that TV stand we trusted was there inside that box. And it was when I brought the box home and I emptied out its contents onto our living room floor that doubts, they were serious doubts. As I mentioned before, those doubts arose in my mind as to whether or not there would be a successful outcome, because I'm pretty sure that the box for the new TV stand contained as many or maybe more parts than did that television set. There were parts of all shapes and sizes. There were different pieces of wood, slabs of wood. There were metal inserts. There were plastic inserts. There were different sized dowels, different sized screws, and fasteners, and hinges, and lions, and tigers, and bears. Oh my, there was all kinds of stuff in there. There were, by my estimation at the time, just about a gazillion bits and pieces spread out on a living room floor, because that's the only place where there was enough room to spread out all the pieces. And how was I ever going to get through that humongous mess and create a functioning TV stand? Had my doubts. But fortunately for me, the TV stand came with instructions. And since I am, for the most part, I'll admit it to you, aware of my limitations, I decided to set my pride off to one side and place my trust in those instructions. And I'm happy to report that the instructions, which were confusing at times, they gave me at least enough guidance to allow me to complete the project, put it all together without any extra parts. Those of you who have assembled furniture before know how important it is to complete the project and not have any extra parts. And now we have a nice looking TV stand that's still holding up the TV set in our living room. It's been there for a year or two, I think. I think the assembly was successful. And I bring up this little episode from my past for a reason. Because even if we're not, engaged in assembling a TV stand for our living rooms, the truth is our lives in the midst of this complex and never-changing world in which we live are made up from all sorts of parts, if you will. Parts, things that need to be carefully managed if we're to have any sort of hope for success or happiness. And there are more parts, there are more things to be managed in our lives than any sort of do-it-yourself TV stand kit. We have to manage our jobs and our finances and our relationships and our health, friendships, and so on. And the list is all but endless. And just to compound the difficulty, there's so much that we simply cannot control. Things happen. Blizzards and floods and all kinds of things happen. And we long for lives that are just neat and tidy, that would go just the way we want them to go, with no issues to cause us pain. But oftentimes, we find ourselves in the middle of a mess, ill-equipped to find a palatable sort of way out of it. Happens. Jobs can end. Relationships can fail. Weather events can throw our plans just completely out the window. Our health or the health of those whom we love can cause problems. And if we didn't have enough problems on our own, our neighbors got problems. We see such sharp differences of opinions when it comes in how to run our country. You got one side saying go this way, and the other side says, oh no, they're completely wrong. You got to go that way. In our government, and even within our church, strong differences of opinion. And it's hard. It's hard to know what to do. And sometimes, and I know this from personal experience, when we find our mess to be frightening and painful or both, and then in the midst of our pain and our confusion, it can seem to us as though we're all alone. And we have no idea how to get ourselves out of the mess that we're in. Pain and confusion have a way of welling up in front of you till that's all you can see. And sometimes you do feel very alone. And sometimes in the midst of our pain and our confusion, we cry out to God. Been there, done that. And sometimes when God doesn't bring immediate relief, because when I cry out to God because I'm hurting, I want it to be fixed. I want it to be fixed now. But sometimes when God doesn't bring immediate relief to our problems, we can find ourselves wondering just where is God in the middle of my mess? Has God forgotten about me? Does God know how bad I hurt right now? Does God even care? These sort of emotions happen. And when they happen, they're painful. And if we care to be honest with ourselves, we have to admit that sometimes we struggle with thoughts that are similar to that when we hurt. And that doesn't mean that we're weak. Doesn't mean that we're stupid or anything like that. Our fears, our pain, our frustration, our feelings of abandonment are part of our human condition. And it's an ongoing condition. Just look at our Old Testament lesson today. Because we kind of come in the middle of the story here, admittedly. We encounter Abram several years after he responded to God's call. Remember that in Genesis chapter 12? The Lord said to Abram, leave your land, your family, and your father's household for the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation and will bless you. I will make your name respected, and you will be a blessing. That's the promise that he gets. Off he goes. But by the time Abram gets to where we see him in today's text, poor Abram, he's been out on the road for a long time. And he's faced all kinds of issues. He's faced famine. He's faced fear for his life. He's had to split up the family into 2 different camps. He's experienced warfare. And at this point in his life, Abram's seen a good deal of pain with very little gain. And in all likelihood, remember, this is not over the span of hours or weeks. This is over the span of years. Abram, in all likelihood, feels that God's promises to him are no closer to fulfillment than they were when he first left home. So it's no wonder that Abram has doubts. And he shares those doubts with God. He's upfront about that. He says, God, what can you possibly give me since I still have no children? The head of my household, in other words, a servant or a slave, is going to have to be my heir. He wondered how all this was going to work because it's pretty hard to be the start of a great nation when you don't even have any kids. But then in the midst of all of his uncertainty, God comes to him in a vision with reassuring words. And we're told that upon receiving these words, Abram trusted the Lord. And when we hear that, at first it might seem a little bit insignificant, but this is huge. This is huge. Because it explains how this whole righteousness before God thing really works. Because Abram trusted in the Lord. He believed in God and God's promises. We're told in the Bible that the Lord recognized Abram's high moral character. Or in other translations, the Lord reckoned Abram to be righteous. And our English translations fall kind of short of really accurately conveying what happened at that instant in time, because Abram believed God and he trusted in what God was telling him. God at that very instant declared Abram to be righteous. He declared Abram to be fit company to be in his presence. And that's a big deal. We need to understand that, because Abram was not declared to be righteous based on what he had done. Because let's face it, Abram's behavior up to that point had shown some fairly significant moral lapses. Such as that really interesting one. He goes down to Egypt in a time of famine, and he gets down there and he thinks, oh, my wife is good looking, they're going to kill me and take her. So he says, just tell everybody you're my sister. He is willing to pawn his own wife off as his sister to stay out of trouble for himself. Pretty high ick factor. And yet God declares him to be righteous, fit company. And this is based on Abram's willingness to believe in God rather than all of the deeds that Abram managed to do up to that point. But God didn't stop there. Because next, and I read it, and as you heard this, it probably sounds kind of weird. It's kind of a bizarre ritual to us, but it was actually a practice at that time. There are other extra biblical references that refer to this act of cutting a covenant. And in fact, you'll see one other reference to it in your Bible in the Old Testament, Jeremiah 34. We'll talk about that very same thing. But it was the most serious way of declaring that you were going to make a binding agreement. Okay? So, to show God's sincerity, God has Abram cut the animals in half and lay them out in 2 rows. One half here, and a pathway in between them. And then, after a terrifying and deep darkness had settled over Abram, God, who is symbolized by that smoking vessel with a fiery flame, God passes between the split open animals. And in this action, this is how this works. God was essentially saying, by passing between those split open, those killed animals, God was saying that may the same thing happen to God if God does not keep God's end of the bargain. In other words, God was saying that God would cease to exist, to no longer be, before not keeping his end of the bargain. God is serious about this. He wanted to make sure we knew that God is serious about this. That's why it's in our Bible. God is serious about keeping God's promises. And notice as you read this story, again, as bizarre as it may seem to us, notice that the actions, the important actions in this story, are initiated by God. God is the one who initiates this covenant and shows us how to believe and the benefits of belief. Because Abram didn't declare himself to be righteous because he believed. God declared him to be righteous. Not based on any superhuman actions, but rather upon a willingness to believe. And so it is to this day. God will declare us righteous. God will declare us to be fit company to be with him, not based on our super duper, super good Christian deeds that we've been able to do, but rather because we believe in him and we trust in him. We turn our lives over to him. And we need to realize that and hold on to that. And realize that God is faithful. Even in the midst of the darkest times in our lives, God will not abandon us. God will not forget his promises to us. Remember, God has promised that God will cease to exist before he fails to honor his promises to us. And that's not going to happen. God is eternal. God will always be there with us. God will always honor God's promises to us. So remember that. Cling to that. Hold it tight. Because there are going to be those times in our lives when we find ourselves in the middle of a mess. A middle of a mess that so confuses or so hurts or so frightens us that we don't have any idea of what to do next, which part of our life, which piece of our life to pick up. There are going to be those times in our lives when we're experiencing our very own times of a terrifying and deep darkness, when all we can see is our pain and our fear. But even in those times, we are not alone, for our God is with us, and He will always be with us, ready and willing and able to carry us, to guide us through those dark times to a better and more perfect time at His side that will never, ever end. Praise be to God for always being there and always being able to take care of us, even in the middle of a mess. Amen.